Steve Wilks is moving to the field, as predicted by this guy. Steve Wilks and Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans have one thing in common. Maybe more, but they definitely have one thing in common. All three of those guys have spent less time coordinating NFL defenses than Fred Warner has spent being an NFL star. Against the Jaguars on Sunday, Fred Warner is going to make his 99th NFL snap. That's a lot of NFL snaps. Now, why is that relevant? Well, take a listen to Kyle Shanahan on Wednesday answering questions from the media. First, a question from Matt Mayoko, who asked, what's going on with Steve Wilks? Has Steve decided to be on the field or in the booth? This is what Kyle Shanahan said.
We're going to put him on the field this week, something we've talked about for a little bit. I think there's pluses to it and minuses to it, but we'll see what we like about this week.
What is your personal feeling on it?
I love being in the box. I think that's the best spot. I feel like you guys would judge me too hard if I went up there. If it ever gets cold enough, I might be. I like a chair and a desk and a lot of stuff to write down and things like that. But I had to do this for 9 years before I got here. I was only in the box 1 year, my last year, so I was 8 on the field before that. There's pluses and minuses to both, so you usually go with your preference.
What swung it? Why move Steve?
Just because of some of the stuff you do in the box, all the advantages to it, which are great, but I kind of wanted to be down and be near our players a little bit. They've had that more just with the linebacker communication in the past. And I want him to be down there so he can talk to guys a little bit more.
I want him to be down there so we can talk to guys a little bit more. It makes you think that the Niners have had communication issues even through their winning streak to start the season that maybe got covered up a little bit because there was so much success, or maybe they were having so much success that they didn't need more communication on the field. It's what the players are used to, he said. He also said he prefers being in the booth. You got to figure that some of this goes back to in-game adjustments and players being able to communicate to the coordinator, not the other way around. Things can get communicated to the players. This defense is a defense that, even though there are some differences in the way it's being run this year that they're familiar with, my guess is that it's about the guy who knows how to play defense on the 49ers needing to give feedback the other way to Steve Wilks. Fred Warner, like I said, is making, including the postseason, his 99th start. He knows exactly what he wants to do out there on defense. He knows exactly what this group of players needs to do in order to succeed. And I think he wants Steve Wilks to be down there on the field so he can talk to him about it as the game moves. This is something that a lot of people, now we've talked about this. I said immediately after the Bengals game, if you've watched a lot of college football like I have, this is a thing that happens a ton in college football. And when it happens in college football, it's a response to external pressures, right? Because your decision makers are your fans in college football. Your boosters are the decision makers in college football. That's not the case here. Kyle Shanahan is not doing this because of fan pressure or media pressure. He doesn't do anything for those reasons. If he responded to external pressures, then why does Christian McCaffrey never get a snap off? If he responded to external pressures, why did he keep Jimmy Garoppolo around when everybody else wanted Jimmy Garoppolo gone? If he responded to external pressures, Jordan Mason, ever heard of him? Not lately. If he responded to external pressures, Robbie Gould would have been back instead of drafting a third-round quarterback. Kicker, what people want. Everyone always wanted him to push the ball at the end of the first half with Garoppolo. Rarely ever did it. Did it sometimes, but rarely. Only when it works for him. He does not do these sorts of things because the fans want it or because the media wants it. And I do always respect a coach who does that. A little easier to do in the NFL, and it's definitely easier to do when your owner stays out of situations. So he's doing this because he thinks there is a fundamental benefit to it. And he said it there. The fundamental benefit is communication with the players. Whatever advantages you get from the booth, we're willing to give those advantages up because the players are not feeling like they're getting what they need from the defensive coordinator right now. And as I said, I got to think that everything starts on this defense. As much as it's about Bosa, it starts with Fred Warner. He is the brains of the operation. It starts with him. And I've got to think this is part of what he wants. So is it a desperate move? Well, I mean, if they had a different record, you wouldn't be doing this. but they don't have a different record. They've lost 3 in a row. They're going to play a Jags team that's also coming off of a bye and is a really good team. So it's a desperate time. It's if you lose 4 games in a row, you are in dire straits. Now you're in the NFC, and the Seahawks just got beat. I mean, you're in first place on your bye week. So from a mathematical standpoint, it's not desperate. But if you're a championship contender, you just made 2 very dramatic moves during your bye week. You got Chase Young, and you moved your defensive coordinator from his comfort zone and from where Kyle Shanahan admitted his comfort zone would be down to the field, because the players need something different. And I don't think it's emotion, because you're not getting that necessarily in the same way you got it from D'Amico Ryans and Robert Saleh from Steve Wilks. Steve Wilks has coached from the field before. I'll be honest, I tried to find out exactly how often he's coached from the field and from the booth. It's hard. Maybe some of you know, maybe somebody else wrote it and I missed it, or said it and I missed it. In Cleveland for a year. But one thing I did find was after he got let go in Cleveland, where they actually were statistically a good passing defense, but they gave up too many big plays. He went to Missouri. And sometimes in college football, teams, when they put out their weekly, what's called their game notes, it's a pack of a bunch of notes. Sometimes what they do in those notes is they list where the coaches are. And the reason they do that is for the television broadcast. So when you're watching a game and they're talking about the defensive coordinator, the camera guys or the director who directs the camera guys knows where to look for that particular coach. You'll have a headshot and it'll say booth, or you'll have a headshot and it'll say field. And they know which coaches are on the field and which coaches are in the booth. Some of that's changed with all these booth cams that they have now, that there's just a camera in the coach's box. But historically, that's what was done. Well, when you go back and look at the 2022 season, 2021 season, whichever it was, for Missouri football, their first 3 games, Steve Wilks is listed as on the field. So he started at Missouri as the defensive coordinator from the field. Now, I don't know, and it's hard to tell. I couldn't find it today. Maybe there's a Missouri football fan here who knows. I don't know if he moved to the booth or he stayed on the field, but after the 3rd week of the season, they stopped listing where he was. So he might have just stayed on the field and they just stopped listing it, but he did coach from the field that year. In Carolina, you look for photos of him. Many of them are on the field. Well, he was the head coach. So I think those were head coach photos. Cleveland, it's hard to find on-field photos of him coaching. My guess is he was in the booth there, but I don't know. So he's done both. And now he's going to be asked to go out of his comfort zone, right? That's just the reality. But kind of what Kyle Shanahan's saying there is, well, the coaches or the players have been out of their comfort zone so far this season. And this is our only fix, right? This is our fix. There's not really a fix after this. If you had the bye week to fix it, and you could do other things to fix it, then you would do all those other things first, right? Moving a coach kind of out of the place where he prefers to be and where you prefer him to be. I don't want to say it's the last move you got, but it feels like it's kind of close to the last move you got. I guess in theory, you could say we're going to do some different things schematically, and they're a little more complicated, or they're just different, not necessarily more complicated. And so the coach is going to be on the field because he's going to need to help guys and the assistant coaches through that. We've come up with some different things that we're going to do after the bye week. And it's going to be better if he's down there to kind of manage it. But, this is a team with a lot of veterans. This is a team that has won a lot of football games. And it feels like the reason Steve Wilks is going on to the field is because the experienced defensive players want him there, because something is getting lost in translation. Something is getting lost in the communication, in the feedback loop, whatever it is. And this is their fix. And, Kyle didn't say it. We'll see when Steve Wilks talks if he says it. My joke with this is always, they always say, like, coming down to the field, I want to look my men in the eye. That's what they always say in college. Like, this happens all the time in college. And when it happens in college, it's usually followed soon after by a change in coordinator. That's my feeling for it. I don't have the statistics on it, but it's kind of a thing that happens when everyone is out of ideas and is kind of exasperated. So, here we are. I think they're out of ideas. I said this for the last 2 weeks. If they're doing this because specifically of player communication, then it's not a completely hollow move. It's not totally superficial. Like, it might actually help. It might help. It might help if they feel like we're just not communicating fast enough and adjusting quick enough, and that will help us play better football. Then great. But they're on the field for a bunch of snaps in a row because these teams are picking up third downs. Not a whole lot you can do in that scenario. So it's from possession to possession. And we'll see. They added Chase Young. That's another help. These are all, you can only do little things at this point. There's no big moves. You don't have some big move that you can pull off in the middle of a football season. Your big moves happen in the offseason. Other than players are big moves. Christian McCaffrey completely changed everything last year for the 49ers. So if Nick Bosa starts getting to the quarterback, once Chase Young came in, maybe we'll say Chase Young fixed that. If the Niners start getting off the field on third downs, maybe we'll say Steve Wilks coming to the field, fix that. But they've made 2 moves, and they both come at a time where, it's the situation is dire. You've lost 3 games in a row. That's a pretty dire situation. By the way, speaking of sacks, let's slip in Robert Saleh today talking about society's misplaced emphasis. Society.
The overall sack production, like I said, is an overrated stat. Quinnen Williams is one of the top 5 defensive players in all of football, and he's proving it down in and down out. And unfortunately, we live in a society where sack production is the measure of how good a player is in and down out. And unfortunately, we live in a society where sack production.
I love that he just used, unfortunately, we live in a society. We've got a societal problem here. And, I don't think we can do anything about this societal problem, but hopefully you get more sacks. Anyway, back to Shanahan. This is, and it's pointed out here. Fred mentioned it. Fred Warner, we've talked about this for 2 weeks. Couldn't speak directly to Wilks, always through a third party. Solid D'Amico spoke directly to players, faster adjustments. But it feels like the adjustment is I, the player, am going to make the adjustment. And well, let me give you a little feedback here on what we need to do. So Brad says it's not desperation, but it's at least a thing that they can do to enact change. And change is definitely ultimately what's needed. So yeah, better communication yields a more responsive D ? It's not, I would agree that it's not desperation, but I would say it's not a little desperate. You would like to think that with a team of this level that you've kind of got all your ducks in a row before a season starts. You bring in a different coach, things change. Maybe that's unrealistic. Teams have adjusted on the fly before. Hell, Sirianni got play calling taken away from him, like shadow taken away from him a couple years ago. Things worked out fine for the Eagles on that. So, yeah, it's this is their move. This is what they got. You can only change so many of the players. You want to get healthy, fine. They didn't get a nickel. Okay. How are you going to keep Oliver from getting targeted all the time? Now, maybe Darrell Luter comes back soon and Robert Beal comes back soon. Those guys are practicing now. They're good players. It looks like, at least, they've got a potential to be good players. So, Michael, making mid-season adjustments is not desperate, but it is necessary in order to have a successful season. It's very well said. Absolutely necessary. Everything is always about adjustments. And I'll just repeat what I've said, which is if this is the adjustment to communication because they've had poor communication, then great. That's not desperate. If that's not what it is, then it's just a little hopeful, and I think any part of this, even if we acknowledge and agree that it's not desperate, it is hopeful for them. Like a little of this is hope. Like we don't know that we haven't done this one before. We haven't moved Steve Wilks. This is not what we wanted to do. So we're hoping a little bit that this will solve the problem. The good news for them if you're Kyle Shanahan, you go to your players for feedback. The guys you're getting feedback from are not some 2-bit chuckers, right? When you go to Nick Bosa and you go to Fred Warner, like Eric Armstead, what do you guys think? Like, these are guys who know what works, Almost 100 games, 2021. That's the one game that Fred Warner missed. He's going to start his 90th regular season game this week. He started 9 playoff games. He knows what works. So if you were going to bet on this being useful or being helpful, you'd say, if you listen to the players, you're listening to some pretty sharp players. You're listening to some guys who get it. Okay. Let's see if they're right. But, the second this doesn't work, you don't have another move. But, here's the thing I will say for them too. The Jags are good enough that if you beat them, however it looks, you get a lot of, this is not, you would happily play the Bucs at home this week. You don't really truly answer if you beat the Bucs at home this week, it doesn't really answer some of the deep questions that we've got. It pushes them down the road a little. You go beat the Jags on the road. You get after Trevor Lawrence, who gets the ball out very quickly, top 4 in the league and fourth in the league in time to throw. You get to the quarterback. You get off the field on 3rd down against Doug Peterson's offense. That tells us, you know what? Some of the stuff you did was real. Like, that stuff was real. So, that's the benefit. But I don't think this is not a fan service move. And the reason I say that is because Kyle doesn't do that stuff. He doesn't do any of that. Can we think of an example? I mean, like Hightower. He fired Hightower, the special teams coach. Was that a reaction to the fan, Twitter, media pressure? Or was that just something that had to happen? I think you'd argue it had to happen. So that's why he did it. If he'd done it as a reaction to fan pressure, he would have done it earlier than he did. But yeah. Oh, okay. Buddy says, Balky's got this game circled on the calendar. Woo! Balky revenge game. Can't wait to see the Niners in person. Hopefully I can be the reason we turn it around. Oh, shit. Chase Young is in the chat. Yeah. Good luck, man. Go get him. I like how the fan base has Wilks in the crosshairs when Kyle needs to step up too. The offense lacks creativity. I don't agree that the offenses lack creativity necessarily, but I would 100% agree that this is not just a defensive problem. Scoring 17 points 3 games in a row after you were a 30-plus point scoring offense. It is such a cliche. Everything feeds into everything. It's a little ecosystem of being a team game. There's less possessions. That's hurt them. Not scoring immediately early in the game, not playing from ahead as much. That hurts them. All these things have hurt them, but there is no question. The offense has not been good enough, no doubt. But I do think there have been signs that the offense is not broken. I think there's definitely the turnovers from Brock and also the red zone turnover from McCaffrey. I do think, to me, like, the offense is right there. It hasn't looked that way in the final score. And even at times watching the game, it hasn't looked that way. But I do think the offense is right there. So what is it? The players or the coach? Well, as always, it's everything. It's always everything. That's why they went and got Chase Young. I mean, they did a player switch, or not a player switch, but a player adjustment and a coach adjustment this week. So it's both things. They went and got Chase Young. They moved Steve Wilks to the booth. Sure, they've gotten some player feedback, not just on where the coach should be, but other things that they need to do to be successful. So it's all that stuff. But I mean, let's go back to Kyle.
If it ever gets cold enough, I might be. But I had to do this for 9 years before I got here. I was on that. There's pluses and minuses to both. So you usually go with your preference.
This is the fall.
Just because of some of the stuff you do in the box, all the advantages to it, which are great, but I kind of wanted to be down and be near our players a little bit. They've had that more just with the linebacker communication in the past. And I want him to be down there so he can talk to guys a little bit more.
All right. I want him to be down there so we can talk to guys a little bit more. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that it was, hey, Steve, I think you should go to the field? And Steve said, I don't want to go to the field. And he's like, no, I want you to go to the field. I don't know. He's been a pretty good collaborator with his coaches. So maybe it was a simple thing for Steve. Steve, the players don't, Steve, Fred wants better communication. Well, if we're going to do that, I got to go to the field, maybe. But you can't deny this sucker was rolling. They were riding high. And now they're doing, I wouldn't say it's weird. It's not a weird thing they're doing, but it's the kind of thing you do when you've lost 3 in a row and you don't have a lot of answers. Can we get the head coach from the Patriots to be our DC? Yes, no, maybe. Unlikely. It's rare that guys become a head coach, have complete control of everything, and then take a step back. You know what? I'm good. It happens sometimes, but generally it's rare that people with all the power say, I want to go a place with less power. It does happen, less responsibility. I just want to coach football, that type of thing. But I don't think old Bill Belichick's the guy to do it. I'd trade a lot for it, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that. So that's the situation. There you go. Dan Quinn did it. Where did Dan Quinn? Did Dan Quinn do it in Dallas? Somebody just said Dan Quinn did it. Dan Quinn did the thing where he was a head coach and then became a coordinator, but he interviewed for head coaching jobs. He tried to become a head coach again. It happens in college. But in college still, I mean, you can make now, $2, $3, $4, $5 million as a coordinator. There's so much more money in being a head coach, but there's also a lot more other shit. But when you're an assistant in college, you still got to recruit. I mean, it can be a pain. So it's hard to hide from that stuff. In the NFL, you still do the weekly press conferences and all that. And again, the money is just so ridiculous that you don't really see it happen for guys. So, I don't know if Vic Fangio's trying to get another head coaching job. He won't, but I don't know if he tries or if he's just content to be a really good defensive coordinator. But yeah, Gerard Mayo, Belichick's kid, some defensive guys coming out of that staff one day soon. Get the Ravens demotions happen. Guy, Josh McDaniels is about to be the water boy in Cleveland. Get the Ravens DC. They're good. Most complete team in football right now. It will be interesting. We're probably Mike McDonald, who spent a minute with the Michigan fighting Wolverines. It'll be interesting to see if this, a future conversation, if this thing doesn't settle down and fix itself, what they do next at defensive coordinator. I got a name for you. Danton Lynn. Danton Lynn is the defensive coordinator at UCLA. His father is Anthony Lynn. Danton Lynn came from Baltimore. Now, things are going well for the Ravens. So if Mike McDonald, the Ravens defensive coordinator, were to become a head coach this offseason, I got to think they'd go back to Danton Lynn next year, not knowing the relationship with Harbaugh and Danton Lynn, but he came from the Ravens. We've seen the Ravens do this repeatedly. They send guys out, do a little internship in college, not really an internship, coordinate, then come back. So it would not surprise me if Danton Lynn is the Ravens DC next year, but he has had NFL level D-line, like a top 15 D-line in college football this year. They got beat up. I mean, they got beat by Arizona. That happens though, but they got beat by Arizona last week. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's an NFL DC soon. And he could stay at UCLA, I guess. He could become a head coach too, a college head coach. They're going to the Big Ten next year, so I would imagine they're going to try financially to keep him around. But who knows? I mean, maybe he could, come coach with his dad. I mean, that'd be a pretty attractive thing. Anthony Lynn and Danton Lynn. That'd be pretty special. That does not happen a lot. Obviously, the head coach of the Niners has done it. So that's a name to keep an eye on. Very well regarded and has had immediate success. As everyone who watches college football knows, being Chip Kelly's DC historically is a difficult job just because the offense scores a lot and they've run the ball, they've controlled it a little bit more. And, maybe that's benefited them as well. But I think he's an interesting name, and he'd be one if the Niners do make a change in the offseason or whatever. That would be I think it'd be a very intriguing guy, kind of back to the Niners history of defensive coordinators without a ton of experience, aka maybe not as kind of set in the concrete with what it is they want to do. So bring Saleh back if the Jets fire him. Unless he was the one that pushed everybody out of the way to draft Zach Wilson, I think he's done a pretty good job. So, yeah. What about Lotus asked, what about Justin Wilcox if he gets fired at Cal? I don't expect Justin to get fired at Cal. He just signed a contract extension. They are not in a position. I think Justin's a good coach, first of all. But they're not in a position going to the ACC next year to spend money on a buyout, even if they wanted to. They're going to be making a significantly reduced rate in the ACC. They're going to have increased travel costs. They are biting off a lot. They're I think not far off from breaking ground on a new basketball facility. So their money's being spent other places, and they are not, they're not going into a new league like SC and UCLA are and getting a bunch of money because of it. They're going to take a financial pay cut next year at Cal. And, it's already, even if they weren't, it's already a difficult spot. So he signed a contract extension before the 2022 season. So that even if that was that's a non-starter. And I don't see Robert going. I think I would keep Robert Saleh around, especially with Rodgers coming back. I don't see any reason for that. Yeah. Wilks isn't the man. Everyone agrees on that. Lynch will be interviewing DCs all off season. Well, I mean, they better figure it out. Like they traded for Chase Young because they think this thing can be helped and fixed, and it better be. I mean, you don't put rosters together like this and then just accept when you're not a championship contender. So, we use the word acceptable and unacceptable comes up a lot. This would be a pretty unacceptable season for the 49ers. Maybe their most unacceptable season if they don't become the championship contenders that they should be. You have a bad year when your quarterback gets hurt, fine. That's, you hate to say it, but that's acceptable. Your defense doesn't perform when you spend as much money on it as you have. And while your quarterback is cheap, well, you got Brandon Ayuk, well, you get McCaffrey, all these things that you don't become the championship contender you're supposed to be. That'd be extremely unacceptable. Adrian with a stat, 30-11. That's the Niners since 2020 in the second half stretch of the season. They have done well with their back against the wall. They have been a good back against the wall team. And it's, the question becomes, what happens if it doesn't work on defense this week? Is this really the last? Do you have anything else? You lose 4 in a row. Teams that are 5-4 don't generally, but how close to the end is this move? Is this like, hey, we've done a few things, we're going to do this also? Or if you lose this game, your defense can't get off the field, are we talking about a coordinator change, which would be pretty dramatic, but losing 4 games in a row is pretty dramatic, right? And that is, you might think that sounds crazy, but that is the level of pressure that championship contenders exist under. are teams that are supposed to be championship contenders. And when you've supposed to have been a championship contender for several years and you haven't done it, that even adds more pressure. So, this is a very, 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 very big game. They just showed us we got 2 moves. They made the 2 moves. If those 2 moves don't work, what's your next move? We'll see. We'll see. All right. Thanks for hanging with us Wednesday night. We'll have a live pod coming. If you're watching this before it, we'll have a live podcast. John and I will be back Thursday morning. We're going to do it around, Thursday morning for some of you. It's going to be around 11 a.m. Pacific on Thursday. So hang out for that. Hit that like button. If you're here right now, we appreciate you. Sponsored by Tito's Handmade Vodka. But the best way you can sponsor this show is by liking the video, subscribing to the channel. When you do that, it sends it off, puts it in more people's faces. The algorithm, help the algorithm, feed the algorithm, feed the algo. Hit the like button here, subscribe to the channel. Helps. And thank you for that. All right. Have a good night or day whenever you're watching this. And we'll talk soon. Later, everybody.